en stream, mais tout le monde va m'entendre parler dans le stream. Maël, voilà. Alors, si je parle, puis disons pas dans la salle. Maël, tu devrais m'entendre. Tu me fais signe si tu m'entends. Très bien. Voilà. Et si vous parlez... Alors... Attendez... Tac. Ah, ici, allez-y, parlez un peu.
Continuing to test. 1, 2, 3. Can you...
Parfait. On vous entend dans la salle, on vous entend partout. Tip top. Alors, je vais mettre Madame Mitchell. Madame Mitchell, I will put your video in full screen, so we are ready here. Probably Maël still explain you. Just feel comfortable, like if you are here in the room with us. You see now what's happening in the room. You can see probably me appearing now in the field, making like a sign. Okay, so we are here. I think you are the second speaker today, this afternoon for us, this morning for you. So yeah, just stay ready, and you will hear what's happening in the room, and they will ask you to start your talk, and just start your talk. And everybody will see you here in the room, will hear you in the room. We managed to have the translation for you. So if someone asks a question here in the room in English, you will hear it in English. But if someone asks a question in French, you will hear the translation
Alors pour les slides.
in English. So be comfortable for you.
So I have slides. Should I?
Yeah.
Later.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure you still tried and test with Maël the screen sharing. Yeah. Just start your screen sharing later when you will start your presentation.
Okay.
It will be more sexy.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So
Là, tu vois, j'ai les deux que tu m'envoies.
stay online and okay. I will see you, but you cannot see me now. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
Tu m'as envoyé que deux PDF.
Voilà.
Bonjour, ouais, c'est moi.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm very pleased to have you all here today, Saturday afternoon, the end of the day in Martigny. Quite a lot of people present here. Thank you for being all here for this conference organized in conjunction with the 50th anniversary of the foundation Dalle Molle and the 30th anniversary of the Idiap. I will make a brief introduction in English, and then we'll go back to French with the president of the foundation, Mr. Jean-Pierre Rosis, who will make a brief introduction, and then we will give the floor to our prestigious speakers, whom I thank very much for being with us today. And of course, we'll have to meet the timing and to be very strict with that. So this conference is under the theme of quality of life, what vision for the future, and when technology, well, computer science, robotics, and artificial intelligence may contribute to it.
All to this conference organized in the context of 50 years of the Dalle Molle Foundation and the 30 years of the Idiap Research Institute. Thank you for the Vatel Hotel for hosting us here, and thank you to our prestigious speaker to talk about AI and quality of life. Ils sont là? D'accord.
They are here with us, yes.
To Berkeley University of California, Institute of Santa Fe, and thank you of the founder of Empowerment Foundation. Et merci aussi à la Fondation Lennart d'être présent aujourd'hui avec la représentante du comité.
Together with the representative of the scientific committee. Thank you all.
Dalle Molle, la fondation Dalle Molle.
The Dalle Molle Foundation, where Jean-Pierre is going to talk about the founder later on. Shortly, he's a visionary industrialist, and he founded the foundation so that technology be at the service of humanity, and humanity be not enslaved by technology. 4 research institutes founded in Switzerland are specialized in computer science, robotics, and artificial intelligence, and they are composed with about 300 researchers recognized at the international level. In this same vision, today, we are thinking about creating a quality of life label applied to the scientific research and innovation projects. What we want to do with this label is to have it for the benefit of the users, for the project leaders who can be universities or manufacturers or companies. We would like them that the IA models used will have to respect the principles of privacy policy and be open source to guarantee the protection of data, and those models be available for testing with data sets, and that the data be open source to guarantee security and transparency in the processing. And the results of the models applied will have to be reproducible from different data sets. On the user side, the goal of this label is to provide more power to the users by enabling them to have at any time the control over their data, and what is particularly important and the most innovative part, the users will be able to choose the model of IA applicable to their data at any time. Finally, the Dalle Molle Foundation hopes to create, with this label, a virtuous circle of trust for research and innovation that use the projects will use the AI to serve humans. We are at the beginning of the construction of this creation, and the criteria have to be defined today. They have not yet been defined. And all these discussions and reflections that we're going to have today are going to feed this label which we're on the brink of creating. So thank you very much for participating today.
And also, why not collaborating on this team? So, merci beaucoup, et pourquoi pas collaborer.
Thank you, and why not collaborating on this theme in the future? Now I give the floor to Mr. Jean-Pierre Rosis, the president of the Dalle Molle Foundation, and wish you a good conference. Thank you, Aurélie. First, I'd like to thank Aurélie for all the work she's accomplished, and to wish on behalf of the Dalle Molle Foundation a very warm welcome to all participants and speakers. And I would like to launch a call for this label. We will really give great importance. We want to create a label, Quality for Life, but we need everyone. This is a major task. And we have to be engaged, every one of us, here in view of the current situation worldwide. And I want to call on all the speakers, companies, enterprises, please come and help us to create this label. We are going to organize participation, and we need your help. We need you. This is a really urgent call to help us. Thank you very much, and have a good conference.
Without further ado, I will give the floor to Professor Hervé Bourlade, who is going to talk to us about artificial intelligence and quality of life. Hervé Bourlade, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Now, I'm a scientist, but I like to give presentations which are rather controversial. I'm more accustomed to speaking in English than in French, and some of my slides are in English. I'm going to talk to you for 15 minutes about artificial intelligence for the quality of life. I hear a lot about revolutions in the field of AI on the radio and TV and social media. Back in 1990, President George Bush declared the next decade as the decade of the brain and artificial intelligence. Tens of billions of dollars have been injected into AI since 1990. Everyone. Back in 1990, I was a young researcher myself. We were very proud to display this badge when we went to conferences, this lapel badge. We all displayed this badge. We were convinced that we were part of the revolution of the human brain, the decade of the human brain, 1990 to 2000. George Bush invested billions of dollars in that adventure. In January 2010, MIT published a report entitled Decade of the Brain, and I invite you to read it. It's an update of a blatant failure of brain and AI research. What does that mean? this does not necessarily mean that researchers did a bad job. It just means that whenever you are dealing with AI and the brain, one should not underestimate the complexity of the task. These are extremely complex processes, and that's what I will try to talk to you about today. Now, one sentence which I like and which is often repeated is that there is no intelligence in artificial intelligence, contrary to what we read in the newspapers every day. There is not the slightest sign of intelligence in artificial intelligence. But a branch of science has been developed recently, which is very, very sound. It's very sound. I will come back to this later. I will tell you what we know how to do today and what we don't yet know how to do. When we ask ourselves questions about the quality of life, when we ask questions about this subject, I'm a scientist as well. I work on AI and I call it into question, but I'm worried when I see that a lot of people are asking questions about AI. And I say to myself, this may well be the first time in the whole of humanity Prometheus stole the fire from his father Zeus, and who gave fire to humanity. And since that age, science has never been called into question. Science was understood as being for the benefits of humanity. It's only recently that people have started to ask questions about science itself. Apart from that, since time immemorial, since Prometheus, it has been considered that science was at the service of society and the quality of life. There were, of course, a few exceptions. We all know about Galileo, who was condemned by the Inquisition and so on, but that's slightly different. The nuclear bomb, we started asking questions about the relationship between science and society. In that respect, this is a premiere in the history of humanity. Even medicine is being called into question. We had already always taken for granted the fact that medicine was working for the benefit of humanity. But now people are coming up with conspiracy theories about medicine. Why? There's no intelligence in artificial intelligence, but just sound science. You have to realize that there's no intelligence in AI, but just sound science, and which we are mastering more and more, and which result from the convergence of several technologies. At the physical level, the development of infrastructure, memories, calculation capacity, etc. All this is linked to convergence at the level of programming, algorithms, mathematics, statistics. There's no miracle here. This is scientific progress. And then there's what I would call the big models. I would call them networks of neurons, but I call them statistical models and symbolic processing. Great strides have been made in the last 20 years in the move towards artificial intelligence, even though, and I say it once again, there is no intelligence in AI. This progress has to be seen in a very special context, which leads people to call things into question. This context started to develop in the 1930s with the invention of advertising. The early days of advertising go back to the 1930s, but really became blatant in the 1950s with the invention of self-service. Production and consumption was multiplied by a factor of 10. And waste was also increased by a factor of 10. People purchase and then throw things away straight away. And increasingly with that advertising, people began to consider humans as part of the production tool and also as a consumption tool. And humans almost became a product in themselves. It's what's happening with Google and Facebook. Many of us don't realize this, but we feel that there's something wrong in the system. Humans are increasingly becoming a product and are being exploited. If we reflect about capitalism, and I am in favor of capitalism, but the face of capitalism has changed. Prior to capitalism, people produced to meet needs. Now we create needs in order to generate, to drive production. So production precedes the needs. This is serious. I think that engineers who are working on AI have to learn to listen much more carefully to humans' needs and to work on the basis of their needs. And that's what the Dalle Molle Foundation aims to do, rather than artificially creating these needs. The minivan appeared in the 60s. We knew the car, but no one said that they wanted to have something. No one had a need for the minivan, but someone just came up with that idea of something halfway between the car and the truck. And the SUVs, it's the same thing for SUVs. On the other hand, there's no intelligence in AI. In 40 years of work as an engineer in AI, I have never found the slightest sign of intelligence. Maybe the next speakers will contradict me, but I've never found a single sign of intelligence in systems designed by engineers. But we should not denigrate the progress that's been made. Possibility of contributing to society with the technologies which are within our reach, we can greatly reduce parasitic tasks. In other words, tasks which are not worthy of a human being. Many people on Earth work in jobs which are not worthy of humans. Those jobs really have to be replaced as soon as possible by machines. And in order to increase the quality of life of the people who did those jobs previously, and also to increase the quality of services. When I see that some people not only overestimate the difficulty of a task, they also underestimate the ability of the human brain. Humans are still very capable of doing things which computers cannot do. One of the main characteristics of human beings is empathy. I will come back to services in Amazon later. One should really stress empathy and when talking about providing services to humans. The technology that we have today really can contribute to improving the flow of information. And information is humanity. It is the future of humanity. Here I'm going to refer to Google. Sometimes Google has gone too far. I'm not talking about its advertising, but when it comes to making information available to everybody, that's a good thing. But I think that sometimes we have got the wrong economic model. Humans should not be used as products. They should be used as users. They should be regarded as users. And the same thing applies to Facebook. Connections between human beings are important. That has to be improved. Work was done only 20 or 30 years ago on intelligent meeting rooms and multilingual communication. It's a good thing, but now Facebook has begun to bias the world of media, and the same applies to Amazon. Amazon is a typical example of how you can get rid of parasitical tasks, menial tasks, packaging things, but now people are put on the trolleys and they have to go and get the objects to be picked up, and they are once again being given very menial tasks, in fact. Even Uber, which is severely criticized, the initial mission of Uber, now of course the term used is Uberization. I think that Uber's initial approach was valid. Makes the individual important. An individual who doesn't have a job and is not part of a social network finds himself or herself useless. Uberization, in a way, is good because anyone can become a little entrepreneur, but when they are excessively exploited, then the process has gone too far. There is no intelligence in AI, just sound science which necessitates often, not always, but often access to large databases, which are sometimes very sensitive. So apart from the fact that humans are being used as a product, there is this problem of access to databases. And this is something which people cannot verbalize, cannot express, but they feel that something's wrong. Not only are they being used as products, but in addition, their data are being exploited, their own private data. And all this is taking place in an atmosphere of great mistrust. So it's important to restore trust between humans and AI, and sensitive data clearly have to be protected. I've almost finished. I've stuck to my allotted speaking time. We have to share positive messages rather than negative messages. Let me give you a few slides in English. Altogether, instead of disseminating fake news on the internet, I think we should work to increase trust between people who work on AI and humans. And I've provided a whole list of things that we can do. Share positive messages, provide open source information, create content and have access to information, make positive changes in the quality of life, create a more efficient society, increase transparency, and encourage societal debates. That's what we're doing here. That's what the Dalle Molle Foundation does. What you have to do is difficult, but we have to encourage societal debates and, of course, increase transparency and data privacy. In addition to that, we have to create a safe zone for data. This helps to build trust in order to improve trust in data. So we have to know exactly what we're doing with data, with personal data. So we have to share positive messages, but not be too ambitious. We're making progress in vision, we're making progress in these areas in deep learning. In conclusion, AI is full of potential, even though it does not have any intelligence. It's full of potential, but it should not be overestimated. Please. At the same time, we should not underestimate the abilities of humans. Our abilities will continue to be greater than what we will be able to achieve in the next few years. We should never turn away from the true missions and true needs of humanity. We should never stray from that path. And we should be wary of the false allegations that we find every day on social media, which can be devastating. Sometimes scientists also play this game. Every day they feel obliged to post things, and some of those things are wrong. We should have confidence and transparency in use of data, and we should remain realistic and transparent in everything that we do. Let's not make people believe in alchemy. Prometheus gave us fire, but let's not believe Hermes, who invented alchemy. Let's avoid that. Let's not believe in alchemy. We have to believe in science, which was given to us by Prometheus, and avoid getting caught up in alchemy. Let's remain realistic and continue to believe in the capacities of human beings, which go far beyond what we will ever be able to model. Let's make full use of our human potential. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup Hervé pour
Thank you very much, Hervé, for this very interesting presentation, which is also referring to the label and the way we might put in place this virtuous or trust circle. Now I'll give the floor to Melanie Mitchell from Santa Fe, and she's going to talk about artificial intelligence for thinking humans. So artificial intelligence for thinking humans. Good afternoon or good morning. So let's have the sound.
Hello Melanie. Nice to meet you.
Hello, thank you for inviting me. I'm going to share my slides. Can you see that okay?
Yes, it's okay. Thank you, Melanie.
All right. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. So I am going to talk a little bit about the current state of AI, what I think its limitations are, and where it might go next. So we've all heard about the deep learning revolution. The idea behind deep learning is actually very old, comes from the visual cortex in the brain, which is at the very back of the brain, which is roughly assembled in a series of layers, like I'm showing here, and that inspired the idea of deep neural networks, which are assembled in a series of layers from the input been in AI research since the 1970s, but only recently has the computing power and data been available to actually make them work. So things like human labeled images in the ImageNet data set has spurred enormous progress in computer vision, especially in recognizing objects. And in fact, over the years of the competition among companies and researchers to do well in this object recognition competition, in 2012, the very first deep neural network was entered in this competition, and the error rate plummeted. It went way down and has gone down, down, down until it's about the same or below human performance on this particular data set. So this has spurred enormous optimism and visible progress in computer vision, including in areas like facial recognition, self-driving cars, which are now able to identify objects on the road, game playing like Go, where we all saw the Go Grandmaster Lee Sedol be defeated by AlphaGo, a program based on deep neural networks. And even for language tasks, such as OpenAI's GPT-3 language model. So just for fun, I put in the names and titles of a few talks at this particular meeting and had GPT-3 generate down below some additional suggestions for possible talks. So I don't know if any of these people are real, but it looks very convincing and generates language that looks very human-like. However, as the previous speaker noted, there are many limitations to current AI, and he said there's no intelligence in artificial intelligence. And even though we don't have a well-formulated definition of what intelligence is, I think I have to agree. So here are some of the limitations. So first of all, we know that these machines learn through millions of human-labeled examples, such as photos or sentences or any other kind of data. And this is very different from human learning, which only requires a very small number of examples, if any at all. These machines are enormous. The neural networks underlying GPT-3, this language generation program, have 175 billion parameters. That's numerical weights in the neural network. And it has to be trained on text amounting to hundreds of billions of words. This scale of size and training makes the creation of these systems available only to large companies that have this kind of computational resource and collection of data. These machines are sometimes not transparent in what they actually learned. Here's a very simple example. One of my graduate students trained a deep neural network to decide whether a photo contains an animal or not. So here the machine says animal, oops, and here it says no animal. It was trained on a large number of nature photographs. But when my student tried to understand exactly what the machine had learned to enable it to perform this task, he found that one of the things that it was using to make this decision was the background, not the foreground of the animal, but if the background was blurry, you can see it's blurry here and not blurry here, that was statistically associated with having an animal because the photographer is focusing on the animal in the foreground, here no focus at all. So this machine had learned to do the task very well, but using information that was not what we had intended it to learn. This is called a shortcut in machine learning. It's very common when the machine learns something that enables it to perform the task, but is not what the same thing that humans use to perform the task, and thus the machine can then make errors that are very unhuman-like. For example, another research group looked at deep neural networks that were very good at object recognition. For example, they could identify this as a fire truck with 99% confidence. But if the object was photoshopped into different poses, now the system was very confident that it was a school bus or a fireboat or a bobsled. And this is amusing, but it really shows that the machine is relying on something very different to make its decisions than what humans use. And in real life, this kind of what we call brittleness in deep neural nets can lead to accidents and catastrophes, such as self-driving cars like Tesla not recognizing a fire truck stopped on the highway and crashing into it. Systems like GPT-3, which I mentioned before, this text generation system, actually has been shown very clearly that it does not understand the text that it's generating, even though it can look very human-like. It can make big errors and very non-human-like kind of behavior. And some AI researchers have called this a clever Hans phenomenon. Clever Hans was a horse back in the turn of the 20th century who supposedly could do mathematics by a human would give it a math problem and it would pound its hoof to give the answer. But it turned out that Clever Hans was not doing math at all. It was responding to subtle body language of its trainer. And this analogy now is that the Clever Hans predictors, these neural networks or machine learning programs, are using subtle clues in the data that is not actually performing the task the way humans would, but responding to subtle statistical correlations. And this is shown in the vulnerability of neural networks to what are called adversarial attacks. So this group showed that if you add to an image that has been correctly classified by a neural network, if you add a carefully engineered perturbation, this is some noise that's been highly magnified here. This is the result. It looks identical to humans, but now the machine will always classify this as an ostrich. And no matter what the picture is, given the engineered perturbation. These are called adversarial attacks on neural networks. And they've been shown to work even by putting simple stickers on stop signs. A machine will now, that has been trained to recognize stop signs, will now recognize this as a speed limit 80 sign, which is not a good thing, especially if this is in miles per hour. Not a good thing for a self-driving car. So these are problems with the current robustness of AI systems, but also show that they really are learning something quite different than what humans learn in the real world. So I wrote a paper recently called Why AI is Harder Than We Think, which went through some reasons why I think AI is not soon going to be at the level of humans. And one of the reasons is that was a quote from Herbert Dreyfus, a philosopher who wrote extensively about AI. And he noted that the unexpected obstacle in the assumed continuum of AI progress has always been the problem of common sense. So common sense is now a huge kind of buzzword in AI. It's a problem that many people are trying to get at, such as Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft. Before he died a few years ago, he invested a lot of money in teaching AI common sense. The Department of the Defense in the United States is devoting quite a bit of funding to trying to get machines to have common sense, but it is a very difficult problem. So I imagine, for example, that a self-driving car is faced with a situation like this. What does it have to understand about the world to be able to predict what's going to happen in this situation? Well, there's many things that humans understand, such as what we might call intuitive physics, how different objects interact in the world, intuitive psychology, how people interact, what their relationships are, biology, other living systems, why this dog is doing what it's doing, models of cause and effect, very vast world knowledge that we're unaware of consciously, but that we use to understand new situations. And finally, the ability to abstract and make analogies to situations that we've been in previously. All of these things are, I would say, AI's biggest open challenges. And we're very far, I would say, from being able to get AI systems to have anything close to human level on all of these abilities, which are fundamental to being able to function in a robust way in the real world. So I wrote about this extensively in a recent book called Artificial Intelligence, A Guide for Thinking Humans, which has just come out in the French edition. So I hope that some of you will take a look at that, and thank you very much for your attention.
de pouvoir discuter de ces sujets, notamment.
Thank you very much indeed, Melanie. It was very interesting. I hope we will have an opportunity to discuss this again. And I hope that we will be able to place AI at the service of humans, and I hope we will all be able to share our common sense and to place common sense at the center of the debate. We're now going to talk not about fundamental science, but about robotics. I'm going to give the floor to Dr. Sylvain Calinon, who is going to talk to us about collaboration and cooperation between machines, robots, and humans. And will be giving us a presentation which is more connected with the application of these devices, of robots. So, Sylvain Calinon, you have the floor. Well, Sylvain is getting set up. We just have to wait a few moments. Thank you very much indeed for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me. I'm going to start my presentation with a little game. Help me to find where Charlie is in this video. It's quite a difficult exercise because in this type of application, there are few peoples who are on the factory floor. You can find a few people, but interaction between robots and humans is pretty limited. The only interaction usually is if a human enters the perimeter of the robot, then the machine stops. Now, in manufacturing enterprises, they use robots which use the same workspace as humans, which collaborate with humans, and which are used as a tool. And we have existing robotics companies which are creating these new products, and new companies which are flourishing and which specialize in this type of collaborative robot. We also have a lot of robotics applications which are not in the context of manufacturing and which are closer to us, robots which are close to us and further away from us. The ones which are close to us are assistance robots. For example, surgical robots, and those which are further away from us, they often are used because it's a place which is too remote for us to go to, and therefore we prefer to send a robot and to pretend that we are present there, but we are replaced by robots remotely. This can be telepresence or teleoperation applications. What is common to these different forms of robots is that these robots are required to be programmed much more frequently than robots in the automotive industry, as I showed you in the video. So our research group has been looking into the way in which these robots are to be programmed and to use imitation mechanisms to be able to do so, to teach the robot how to do a task in exactly the same way you would teach a human to do the task. I will show you this in the various examples. First of all, with the collaborative robots. Let's look first of all at what a robot is. If we take a humanoid robot, you can define it technically as a series of actuators and sensors and the way in which these are connected up. But if you define it in this way, there are many other things you could define in the same way. For example, an automatic door is also a sensor, an actuator, and a way of linking the two up. In a way, the robot suffers from the fact that in the first context, we are certainly going to be afraid that the robot might just be a replacement, whereas in the second context, we are probably going to forget the fact that once this mechanism may be used to replace certain jobs. We can ask ourselves questions about the word robot itself. Often robot has pejorative connotations in some uses. Now going to move on to the Codiman project, which is a cooperation with my colleagues at the Bern University of Applied Sciences, with these two people whose names you see on the top right of the screen, Professor Rocha and Professor Salat. Now, the idea is to do cyclical testing. The approach is centered on the persons who are going to use these technologies, and they are going to be used for different needs. We're talking about different industrial needs, agility, 3 different industrial needs: agility, productivity, and flexibility. And we're going to intervene on the people who really need these tools. Now, maybe we have an idea in mind about these technologies. We observe how these people will use those technologies, and we will see whether they can help us to reformat these technologies so that they can be even more useful. So the notion behind this project is one of empowerment, to really see the robot as a tool which people can use in the way in which they wish. Maybe some people will use it very little, but this flexibility also has to be provided so that it can evolve over time. Initially, the robot will be tested for a task which is not very important, and then the people who are testing it will be able to contribute their own knowledge to acquire this technology. Now I'm going to say a few words about robots used for assisting people. Here we see a large number of new applications for assistance robots. Let me give you some examples. For example, a robot that can help someone to get out of bed, get up from a bed, a physiotherapist robot, and a robot which helps people to make food, bottom left, and here a robot which can help with washing. Again, what's important is to have this flexibility aspect, but also the personalization aspect. In other words, each person is going to have different needs. And of course, it's also important to be able to reprogram the machine according to the person. Often it's a tripartite interaction. It's not only between the one person and the robot, but maybe also the medical staff who have to be able to reprogram the machine so that a third party can use it. Now, there are 2 projects I would like to describe with regard to this application, iDress. We have 2 scenarios: helping someone to put on a shoe or to put on a jacket. And behind the person, you can see the technological elements that you need in order to be able to help this person. The big challenge here is that you have to combine not only a movement, but an applied force, so that the person is not constrained by the robot, but can move freely. So you have to have a robot which needs to be flexible most of the time and rigid only when you really have to apply a certain force to do a specific task. Another example I would like to show you is a project which started recently, for which we would like to develop a robot to provide personalized assistance to help a person stand up and sit down. If you do a model of what happens, if you know the person and if you know the robot, what has to be done to help this person, you have to have some hypotheses about the number of points of contact. Now, personalization involves saying that there are, of course, joints, some joints which may be more problematic than others, and we want to provide assistance which can be adapted to this specific scenario. One person might have a joint which hurts him or her, or which does not have enough muscles. The project is still in its infancy. The users are very important. We are doing this with our colleagues from the Joseph Stefan Institute in Slovenia, who specialize in studying behavior patterns when two people collaborate with one another, but also with all the biomechanical aspects. In other words, being able to collect the data with several types of sensors in order to understand what type of assistance you need for this particular application. So in summary, the message I would like to convey with this presentation is that when you think of the word robotics, you have to realize that robotics is a very vast term. It can be assistance robotics, collaborative in industry, or processes, or rehabilitation tools, and so on. I will end with this last slide, which shows you the faces of the people who are behind the projects that I've just described to you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sylvain, for this very interesting presentation. We do see indeed that IA does not replace humans, but contribute to the improvement of quality of life. Now I'll give the floor to, we go to a very different field in an application of what AI may serve in our everyday life, and on the long term, how IA may be used in sustainable transition in the context of climate change. And now I'll give the floor to Dr. Eric Valette from the company Aqua4D. You have the floor. Thank you very much. Thank you for this invitation. So let's have a small break regarding the AI and robotics, but this is really perfect regarding to our today's theme, quality of life, what vision for the future, because 99% of humans are made of water, and we are living on the blue earth, 2/3 of water. So this is a major element of the life on earth. So how to sustain sustainable transitions worldwide with technology, water technology. So today, we all know what water risk is in numerous countries, and which is getting worse and worse every year. And this water stress is going to get worse and worse. There are a lot of deserts every year, and a lot of drafts, etc. Some limited reserves. We know that fresh water is only 3% on the planet, and the exploitable part by humans is much lower than this 3%. It's 0.001% only. And all this water is used in 3 sectors, the biggest of it, agriculture with irrigation. So talking about irrigation, agriculture is for the protection of the food protection worldwide, which is very important, of course. And we see that articles every day, there are reports about droughts in various parts of the world, with water reserves and dams getting lower and lower, and etc. in many countries and on all continents. Well, various examples, maybe the last one, we are very active in the States, in particular in California, where we have a company, and this is the cereal reserves of grain reserve of United States. And this year, the situation is really complicated, catastrophic indeed, with their water resources. And there are major restrictions, water restrictions in California, and this is going to be more and more complicating in the future. So now we are faced with a major challenge worldwide, how to feed a growing population. We expect to have 10 billion inhabitants in 2050. Together with the climate change, with a lot of more droughts and disasters and no draft this year in Switzerland, because on the contrary we had a lot of water, but we know that even if Switzerland is the water reserve of Europe, there are some problems with water in Switzerland, and there is a project here in Valais to settle these water problems in summer in Valais, in this canton. So today we note that we have less water, less soil, growing population, water scarcity in many regions, and we will have to feed more and more people on Earth. So what shall we do? We need new technologies, and this is where robotics and AI and data analysis and drone satellites are going to have to be more efficient to feed more people with less resources. And this is where our company works, and our technology, we want to try to produce more with using less resources. So today we work in 3 different fields. The main one is the irrigation, to improve the efficiency irrigation through precision irrigation, also in plugging matters in the buildings, and also in the alimentation, water alimentation, in breeding to get rid of the bacteria which are very bad for the yield production. We are based in Sierre, not far from Martigny, our company. So briefly, there are thousands of installations in many countries. Our technology is very creditworthy, and we have a lot of references over all 5 continents. Our technology, we work with electromagnetic fields. We are going to modify water properties. So water, we do not add anything to water. We do not take anything from water, but this magnetic resonance are going to improve the dissolution of water, and water is never isolated. We always have thousands of molecules in the water, and in between these we have bacteria and molecules and everything. And with our technology, we will improve the solution in the water. And you see here on the pictures, there are such very, very tiny waters which are being evaporated, and it's exactly the same chemical properties, one treated or not treated with our technology. And you can see how the repartition of the images are, but chemically speaking, it's exactly the same. So if we go and we see the carbonate calcium cubic forms, we have the same concentration of calcium, but with our technology on the right, we'll have a lot kind of crystallization. Instead of having this calcite, which is a big rough form, then we have aragonite, which is going to prevent the clogging in the tubes. So our technology, you can see in the pictures down, are being used in every kind of situations, in agriculture, in hydroponic, aeroponic, on big or small installations in California, where there are a lot of pumps and big pumps with very, very little energy, easy to feed with solar panels. As I told you, we work on some physical properties of water, finally have direct positive impact on the water, on the soil, and on the plants. To have these water clusters, smaller water cluster, which makes the water easier to go through the soil, because there are salinity problems, or depending on the soil composition. Once the water is in the soil, it's going to be easier for water to feed, to nourish the soil, which means we have a savings of 30% of water. And since water is going easier, then the roots is going to take more water, and the roots are going to be thinner, which means the plant is going to be much more robust for any stress. And there's a direct effect on the minerals, which are dissolved, much better dissolved. And then we have many roots stronger roots for the fertilizers, so we can use 30% less water, 30% less fertilizer, and finally have better yields with less resources. And it's very easy to calculate this by taking flowers and fruits with a lot of minerals, even though we consumed less water, and a better quality at the end of the day. The last element, which we are unique, is this saturation of soils with salt, which is the biggest problem we have in semi-arid soils. These soils cannot grow cultures in Brazil. We can take the forests down to be able to cultivate sojas or whatever. Normally, when there is a lot of salinity in soils, we need to use a lot of good quality water. Now, even though we use 30% less water, these minerals will be available for the plants because water is going to go through the soil, and these minerals will be better for the plants. The 30% water savings we make are very important because our specialists today say that in most river basins we are going from a scarcity situation to a sustainability situation. It's only a 30% water savings, so only 20 to 30% water savings is really important in major regions, in most of the regions worldwide. So we also provide services. We have engineers on site to measure what we're doing to give the most benefits of the technology, and we measure what we do. So we have a major, very important database on improving the use of water. For example, here it's a very big yield of almonds in California. There is one part treated with our technology and one part for controlling, and then we provide sondes to put them in soil to measure humidity of the soil, then the dynamic of salt in soil. Also, we take some soil samples to analyze, and we use some sensors on the trees to measure the growing of the trees. Then we also use drones and satellites to take pictures with algorithms depending on the agriculture, and to provide the humidity of soils and etc. And they're going to measure the evolution of trees, for instance, and with AI and with algorithms we get to know how plants are comfortable or not, so that agricultures or farmers can modify their habits and reduce the irrigation, use less resources for in favor of the plants. So we use less water, so we save energy. We use less fertilizers. We can use water with salt instead of fresh water. So we replace. We can preserve the soils. All these elements allow to make a major energy savings. That's the reason why company is supported by the Department of Environment and the Swiss Foundation for Climate, due to all these savings, important savings we're making. And we put in place a program of share the values for good agriculture, regenerative agriculture. We, in addition, have benefits for the environment, for the society, and for the corporates. The ISG, through multinational companies, which really communicate strongly about that, because consumers are seeking sustainability, and we bring those both elements with our technology. This is the DNA of our technology, and we meet 11 of the development goals, and we have solar panel on our roof, so we produce more energy than we consume over the year. To sum up, so water is the blue gold, and this is the challenge of the third millenary, and it's going to replace oil in the future for the third millennium. Irrigation in arid and semi-arid areas, but not only. And we have a project here in Valais. Although Switzerland is the water reservoir of Europe, little impacted by salinity in water and soils. It allows water savings, important water savings, to move from scarcity to sustainability. It can help prevent population migration to produce more, and in some regions of the world the situation is such as in Morocco, in Central Asia, in Aral Sea, that people are migrating because they cannot cultivate, or there are no farmers any longer because there is no water. And this is key in combination with other technologies, especially like agriculture 4.0, robotics, which is more and more used in agriculture for more efficiency, to replace some humans for yields, for crops. Now we have robots are targeting the fertilizers. It's more and more used. The object internet, the data use, algorithms, AI, this drones and satellites, etc. And for an efficiency, and to try and solve the challenge of feeding the world with less resources. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Eric Valette, for enlightening us about this subject, not only for individual humans, but for humanity, with the use of AI, which is essential for the future of humanity, with this war for water. I'll now give the floor to Dr. Sébastien Marcel to talk to us about another subject, another application, which is just as important. He is going to talk to us about biometrics security. Biometric security.
Ça le fait. C'est bon. Super. Parfait. Alors bonjour, bon après-midi.
Good afternoon. Good evening. Well, I'm going to talk to you about a subject which is quite different from fairly different from the ones that we've been hearing recently in the last hour. So, subject is biometrics, and in particular biometric security. What interests me in particular is the security part of the aspect. You will see in a moment what I'm talking about. Biometrics, well, maybe you haven't heard about it, or maybe you thought it was rather abstract, but most of you have it in your pocket, because nearly everybody has a mobile phone in their pocket. And there's a high chance that they will be able to carry out facial recognition or recognize fingerprints. You've probably been exposed to this just over 1 year ago, when you were still able to travel freely, and when you were still able to use an automatic door and for passport control, and when your face was recognized automatically. I hope most of you have not been exposed to biometrics in the area of crime, criminality. Biometrics are, of course, used by criminal investigation officers to characterize traces left behind by criminals and taking samples on crime scenes. And there, biometrics is used as a tool. So here I have schematized in simple terms what a biometric system is in general. I'm going to take facial recognition as an example, because, of course, we all know what a face is. When you do facial recognition, what does one do? One does essentially comparisons. One compares one face with another. The first thing you do is that you have to have a sensor. You have to have a camera which takes an image of the face, a sensor in English, And then this image is processed in a number of stages so as to be able to be compared at the end of the process with a reference which is contained in the database. For example, you have probably recorded an image of your face in your mobile phone. It could be a video surveillance application that it's used for, or an identity check application when you are entering a secured building. Now, AI has completely replaced this module here, module number 3. And you find it a lot here. 6 years ago, that was not the case. 6 years ago, you had a human being who was carrying out this stage. Now it's being done automatically by a computer based on a large number of data. I'm not going to explain to you exactly how we do facial recognition, but what one does in order to deceive facial recognition. This is one of our research subjects. On the one hand, we try to play the bad guys. We try to break the facial recognition systems. That's the very cool part of the job. Once we've succeeded in doing that, we try to find ways and means of detecting attacks. So we try to ensure that the biometric system becomes more robust to resist attacks. For example, as regards the facial recognition application on my mobile phone, the iPhone 10 is equipped with that. But now you find very high-end or not so high-end ranges which with facial recognition systems, but they can be deceived fairly easily. You can do this at home. I'm not going to cite the names of brands, but this is at the lower end of the range. You can deceive these telephones very easily, whereas it's much more difficult to deceive an iPhone 10. Now, the ones which interest us in particular are the ones I'm going to be illustrating in a moment. That's attacks numbers 1 and 2. This attack number 1 are direct attacks. You try to copy the biometrics. You falsify someone's identity. You try to usurp that person's identity to pass yourself off as that person. And you print out a photograph and you try to pass yourself off as another person. Second attack consists of injecting in the system. Of course, you have to have some of a hacker's talents in order to be able to penetrate the IT system, in order to be able to do this injection. Not anyone can do this. So you have to penetrate the IT system and inject a false piece of data. And this is where we're going to talk about the fakes. I'm going to show you some examples which show you the progress that's been made since 2009, when we started to work on these attack problems. This is the first and simplest attack, which was published in 2009, which was reproduced on a larger scale in 2010, where we showed systematically what you need to do to deceive a laptop with a photograph. You have to quantify number of different facial recognition algorithms. Thanks to this, we managed to develop very basic countermeasure systems. Of course, it's normally the system knows the difference between a photograph and a sheet of paper. You can go further than this, and you can imagine the following. Now, I've left out some of the stages. We've left out, there were some intermediate steps, but you can go even further. You can make some ultra-realistic masks in 3 dimensions. These are full-fledged masks with holes, either to see through them or to breathe, made of different materials, made of resin. We've studied some in the past made of resin. Here they are ultra-realistic, photorealistic masks made of plastic or of silicone. If you've gone up to the second floor here today, you will have seen some of these masks and the systems used to detect them. We created these masks in my research project to see that you can break the systems with more elaborate attacks. The aim, of course, being to create more effective countermeasure systems. Another form of attack, these attacks are what we call based on artifacts. In other words, objects that resemble a human being in order to deceive the machine. But you can alter the human. You can sometimes simply use makeup to change a person's appearance. It was shown not by us but by someone else that it is possible to change one's appearance in order to resemble someone else. On the internet, there are some artists who change their appearance just by using makeup, not by resorting to prostheses in order to resemble celebrities. You have to be very talented to do that. At Idiap, we don't have those talents. But what you can do is you can use makeup to change a person's appearance and to make the person look older. It would be nicer to make a person look younger. But anyway, so we managed to show that we managed to make the person look older just by using makeup. It was one and the same day. One and the same person on the same day, just by using makeup. So the idea was to test the facial recognition systems to see whether they were robust enough to be able to deal with aging. The aim was to see whether we could detect, whether the system could detect whether makeup was being used. It's very difficult at the moment today because it's a real human being to whose face we applied pigments which are very delicate and very difficult to analyze by computer vision. Now this is what the computer camera sees. The camera sees when you do an attack, presentational attack. It can be carried out in different ways. You can present a photograph, show a photograph of different qualities or a screen, and this is what the camera, the computer, the machine sees. Now, you see the same images as the computer. Which one is true and which one is false? Do you think this one is false? The answer was not audible. Do you think it's true or false? Is what I can see an artifact or not? Would you say it's true or false? That one is true. This one here, true or false? And this one? This one? Everything is false. Everything is false, in fact. Now you're going to tell me what's the difference. There are two differences. The first difference is that in the first column, the attack that's carried out is a sheet of paper. Photograph was printed on a sheet of paper, but the original image was captured in different ways. The second attack was done with the screen of a mobile phone. So the image is bad quality, out of focus, rather blurred, because the telephone in the phone is slightly out of focus. You have to increase the distance so that the attack is realistic. The last attack was done on a big screen. There you display the photograph. So you can see that even for you, it was not easy to tell real from false. So the attacks are becoming more and more realistic. But I've not yet got to the most realistic one. This was in the early days, 10 years ago. Now we're trying to detect these attacks, and we very quickly bump up against a limit, which we tried to show in our project. Now there is another form of attack which is fairly problematic and which concerns identity documents. It concerns, it's called morphing attacks. There's a number of countries in the world and in Europe as well, you wear to get a driver's license or a national identity card. You bring along your photograph, you complete a form, you hand in your form and you leave. Then afterwards you receive your identity documents. And normally there is a digital chip which has been scanned, but it so happens that if you have touched up the photo digitally yourself, for example, by merging two different people, you will find a totally valid identity document which will enable each of those two different people to travel validly with that document. So someone can find themselves in Europe with a numerical image which has been morphed from two different people. So the accomplice can travel on the passport of another person. This has been demonstrated. This has been proven on state-of-the-art facial recognition systems. So this is a vulnerability that does exist. Don't worry, I will finish on a positive note. But before that, I would like to say a few words about the deep fakes. Deep fakes, hypertrucage in French. So the idea is to transform the face of one person into the face of another person to make you believe that this is reality. On the right, you recognize the person, you recognize the actor, who is Tom Cruise. Well, it's not Tom Cruise. You recognize Tom Cruise, but in fact it's this person, who's an actor. He was asked to mime and to talk a bit like Tom Cruise does, and then deep fake software was used, which is based on AI, to transform the face in real time into that of the face of Tom Cruise. So in fact, anyone's face can be transformed into the face of Tom Cruise. That's very difficult to detect. Now here are other images of deep fakes. Now all these people don't exist at all. Don't exist at all. These are totally synthetic images. There's very little chance that these people exist on the planet. This is scary, because if you create a synthetic image, what can it be used for? It can be used to create false profiles on the internet, to do industrial or political espionage. So it's very dangerous. You can also do real-time videos. That's starting to emerge. And we're beginning to be able to combine the photos with the voice. So hyper-realistic audio faking. My speaking time's nearly up. So this technology is really diabolical. But the technology can also be used for good purposes. For example, for data confidentiality purposes, normally you need a certain volume of images who have to agree to use of their photograph. And European regulations will soon ban the use of facial recognition in a certain number of applications. So it's getting very difficult to collect these photographs with the person's consent. A lot of companies are using photographs of people without their consent. The question is, how can I use genuine photographs of people if I am not allowed to do so? The answer is maybe to use these deep fake technologies to create synthetic images. And since you can create these synthetic images, you can also control the factors within them. For example, the luminosity, and to change the gender, change a man to a woman. For example, all these images are synthetic. And if you can vary certain factors to change the expression, the brightness, all the factors which are necessary for facial recognition. Thank you for your attention. I will take your questions later.
Thank Thank you very much, Sebastian. This was really thrilling, and we really want to learn more, but we don't want to learn more. It's a bit contradictory, our feelings. So now I'll give the floor to Professor Stuart Russell from the Berkeley University, who is going to talk to us about the human-compatible AI and problem of control. Professor Stuart Russell, nice to meet you.
Hello, nice to see you.
I give you
Thank
the
you very
floor.
much for inviting me.
And I give you the floor for your speech. Thank you so much.
Merci. Okay, so I'm going to talk about artificial intelligence and what it's for. And I'm going to begin with a very simple definition, one that's common enough in AI that I've called it the standard model. So, of course, AI is about making intelligent machines, but what that means and has meant for most of the history of the field is machines whose actions can be expected to achieve their objectives. And so this is what we do. We develop this optimizing machinery, whether it's planning algorithms or reinforcement learning algorithms or supervised learning algorithms. And then we plug in the objective and set the machine going to solve the problem for us. And there's lots of different branches of AI, but the standard model applies to all of these, and in fact to many other disciplines like control theory and statistics, operations research, and economics, all operate on the same standard model of optimizing some fixed specified objective. And one of the characteristics of AI research over the years is that the goal, not always explicit, but certainly implicit in what we're doing, is that we would like to achieve general purpose AI, which would mean roughly machines that are capable of quickly learning to produce high quality behavior in any task environment. And any here would mean certainly any task environment in which humans can perform well, but probably many other task environments as well, where our physical or cognitive limitations prevent us from performing well. And the question that I really want to address today is, what if we succeed? And that seems like a reasonable question to ask, given that we are all trying to do this. One vision of success would be that with general purpose AI, we can simply use that capability extended with the physical appendages that robotics produces to do what we already know how to do. Right? We already know how to build houses and lay water pipes and so on and so forth. And so if we can simply have AI systems carry out all the complicated processes involved, which are currently very expensive, we can use that to lift the living standards of everyone on Earth to a respectable level, without additional science fiction inventions of eternal life and faster than light travel and so on. And just doing that, just giving everyone a respectable middle class, or what in the West we call respectable middle class standard of living, the foundation's goal of quality of life, would be a tenfold increase in the GDP of the world. And if you translate that into the net present value, would be about $13.5 quadrillion. So that's one sort of ballpark estimate of the size of the prize that AI is working towards. And there would also be additional things we might be able to do that we currently can't do, like raise the quality of healthcare, give everybody on Earth an extremely high quality, individualized, personalized tutor kind of education, and improve the rate of scientific research progress. But if you asked Alan Turing, what if we succeed? This is what he said in 1951. It seems probable that once the machine thinking method had started, it would not take long to outstrip our feeble powers. At some stage, therefore, we should have to expect the machines to take control. So he says this with no solution, no mitigation, just resignation. So these are two very different visions, and obviously they can't really coexist. Now, if we move forward in time from Turing in 1951 to the present, we are seeing some of the capabilities that were once dreamed of starting to become reality, including the self-driving car and the World Go champion. This is an example from my group. The monitoring system for the nuclear test ban treaty is now a large probability-based AI system. This is a picture from North Korea showing the instantaneous and accurate detection of a nuclear explosion that took place in 2013. We're, of course, finding ways to use AI for evil, rather than AI for good. One of the most worrying developments is the use of AI to kill people. And we're already seeing events, for example, in Libya last year, the drone on the left, a Kargu drone from STM, which is a Turkish weapons company, was used to attack humans autonomously, so not remotely piloted, but operating autonomously. In Geneva, in November, the member states of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons will meet once again to make no progress on a treaty banning these weapons. So with all this progress, people are now perhaps taking seriously the possibility of success in creating general purpose AI. But as Melanie Mitchell's talk pointed out, we are not there yet. And in fact, I agree with Melanie's point that we are further away than many people think. But when you look back over the longer time scale of progress over the last 70 years, we've seen a series of very important breakthroughs happening. And deep learning is just the latest in a long series of breakthroughs. And we need more breakthroughs. But I think we have to assume that those breakthroughs are going to occur. And we will have AI systems that are able to make better decisions than humans across the broad range of real-world scenarios in which humans operate. And then Turing is asking us, if that happens, then we're creating machines that are more powerful than human beings, because it's our ability to make good decisions, intelligent decisions in the real world that gives us power over the planet, over all the other species on the planet. And so we're creating machines that are more powerful than us. How do we retain power over entities that are more powerful than us forever? And Turing obviously sees no solution to this problem. I actually think there is a solution, but it means reconceptualizing artificial intelligence from the ground up. So to see an example of how things go wrong, we can look at what's happening in social media. So when you specify an objective like maximizing click-through, the probability that the user clicks on the next item that is recommended, or you could also maximize engagement or various other kinds of proxy metrics. You might think, well, the learning algorithm is going to learn what it is people want to click on, and it's going to send things that they're interested in, and that seems like a good idea. But in fact, this is not what happens. The algorithms don't just learn what people want, because that's not the best way to maximize click-through. If you're a reinforcement learning algorithm, what you learn is a sequence of actions, a policy that will maximize the long-term reward. And the policy does that by changing the state of the world. If it's a Go program, it changes the Go board by adding pieces to it with the goal of winning the game in the long run. If you're a recommendation algorithm, then you change the board, namely the brain of the human that you're interacting with the goal of winning in the long run. So you send a sequence of content that changes the person into a different person who's more predictable. And if the person is more predictable, then you can get a higher click-through rate from them by sending them the stuff that you know they're going to click on. And so this is simply the solution to the optimization problem that was specified by the social media platforms to maximize click-through. This is probably not the solution they want, and it's certainly not the solution that we want, but this is the solution to the problem that was specified. And it's creating, I would argue, a pretty catastrophic situation in the world. And this is just one example of what goes wrong with misspecified objectives, that as the AI gets better, the outcome for people gets worse, because the AI system is more able to make a mess of the rest of the world through its ability to make decisions in the world that optimize the incorrect objective that we've given it. It will also be more able to prevent us from interfering with its actions. So certainly the learning algorithms that operate in social media platforms don't have the ability to prevent interference, but the corporations that protect them certainly do have the ability to prevent interference with the operation of the algorithms. So if it's the case that AI systems pursuing incorrectly specified objectives could lead to catastrophic outcomes, then that suggests that there's something fundamentally wrong with the standard model, because it requires us to specify objectives completely incorrectly. And coming back to the purpose of the foundation, the quality of life, I'd be willing to bet that the foundation does not think that it knows exactly how to define quality of life, that it could take any future sequence of states of the world and rank them according to which one has a higher quality of life, and do so using an explicitly written down definition of quality of life. I don't think the foundation thinks that. I don't think governments think that. To some extent, we know it when we see it. So if we experience something that we hadn't thought of, either as particularly desirable or particularly undesirable, but we experience it and we realize that it is, then we can sort of tell. But our ability to write down in advance a complete and correct specification of the quality of life or any other objective in the real world that's really an impossible task. So the new model that I'm going to try to convince you is the right way to think about AI is based on replacing the definition that I gave you at the beginning, that machines are intelligent to the extent that their actions can be expected to achieve their objectives. We're going to replace that with just a small change. Machines are beneficial to the extent that their actions can be expected to achieve our objectives. And so this is the key, the change from their objectives to our objectives. And of course, this is a more difficult problem because our objectives are in us, and in particular, we're unable to explicate exactly what they are. But this is a much more robust formulation of the problem that we're trying to solve, because it doesn't require that we explicate our objectives and plug them into the machine, which then assumes that those objectives are exactly correct. So I've formulated this in deference to Isaac Asimov in 3 principles, and there's some overlap with Isaac's laws, but also some very important differences. So the first goal is that, first principle is that the robot's goal is to satisfy human preferences. And preferences here I'm using it in the same sense that economists use it, which is really preferences over lotteries or probability distributions over entire futures of the world. So everything that you could possibly care about, and not just what kind of pizza do I like, but entire futures. And the second principle, and this is the key point, is that the robot does not know what those preferences are. And this uncertainty about the objective turns out to be central to enabling us to retain control over machines. The third principle basically says, okay, so if the robot doesn't know what preferences are, then where is the grounding here? And the grounding here is in human behavior, that our underlying preferences generate our behavior, and therefore our behavior provides evidence of what those underlying preferences are. It's a complicated and imperfect process that produces behavior, and therefore there's no straightforward mapping from behavior back to preferences. But nonetheless, that is the source of evidence for what human preferences are, at least until we have better direct understanding of the brain. So you can take these three principles and formulate a mathematical definition of the problem that the AI system is trying to solve, which we call an assistance game. So it's a game because there's at least two participants, at least one robot and at least one human. And it's an assistance game because the robot's goal is to satisfy, basically to maximize the human payoff in the language of game theory. But the robot does not know what that payoff function is. And when you write down those games and solve them, then you can look at the solution. Right? You can say, what's the Nash equilibrium? What is the way that the robot should behave to satisfy these three principles? And you see behaviors that don't occur in the classical model where the robot knows the payoff. For example, robots solving assistance games will defer to humans who are the ones who actually have the payoff and know it. The robot will ask permission before carrying out an action that would change parts of the world whose value the robot is not sure about. So, for example, if the robot is tasked with fixing the carbon dioxide concentration, so taking it back to pre-industrial levels in the atmosphere, if it comes up with a solution that involves turning the oceans into sulfuric acid, and we haven't told it our preferences about the oceans, then rather than just carrying out the plan, which it would do if it believed that the objective was to restore carbon dioxide levels, it would ask permission. It would say, is it a good idea for me to change the oceans into sulfuric acid while solving the problem? And we would say, no, probably not. Let's not do that. Find something else. And in the extreme case, if the robot might be doing something that we really don't like, it will allow itself to be switched off. So this is sort of the extreme case of asking permission. It's entirely happy for us to just switch it off because it doesn't want to do whatever it is that would cause us to switch it off, but of course it doesn't know what that is. So it always allows itself to be switched off. And that's the opposite of the classical machine that's pursuing an objective that it believes to be complete and correct, which would never allow itself to be switched off because that would guarantee failure in achieving the objective. At least in simple cases, we can even prove a theorem, right? So raising up a level to the decision of the humans to build this kind of machine, a machine that solves assistance games, we can show that it's rational for humans to build and deploy machines that solve assistance games, that this is a sensible thing for us to do. And the nice property of this model is that as you improve the AI, you're actually getting better rather than worse outcomes because the machine is going to be better at learning and understanding our preferences and carrying out actions that help us to achieve them. to this, you're thinking of all kinds of complications and difficulties and open problems and so on. And yes, there are lots and lots of complications. So they include the fact that there are many humans, and that machine making decisions on behalf of many humans is in the same situation as a government, or to some extent as a human being. And that leads to many of the problems of moral philosophy and economics. So this is not a new problem, but perhaps the sort of definiteness of the AI setting will help us to make progress on figuring out how to trade off the preferences of many people. And certainly I'm not suggesting, as many people seem to think, that there's one set of human preferences or one set of human values. There are 8 billion humans, and that means there are 8 billion sets of human preferences. And of course, they don't have to be the same. It's also the case that there can be many machines involved in this assistance game. They won't all necessarily be designed by the same company or have the same software. And so you also need to figure out how not to have strategic interactions among the machines with sort of prisoner's dilemma-like failure modes in their interactions. Understanding the preferences of humans involves actually dealing with the fact that we're emotional, the fact that we're myopic, and also that, very importantly, the fact that we are changeable. Our preferences are malleable. Obviously, we're not born with complicated preferences about the future. And the theory that deals satisfactorily with human beings whose preferences can be changed by the actions of the machine. And then if this approach turns out to be right, then that means that because every area of AI has at its foundation the idea that the objective is fixed and known, whether it's in search, there's a cost function and a goal. If it's in reinforcement learning, there's a reward function. So all these areas have fixed known objectives. And therefore, since that assumption is not correct, we have to rebuild each of these areas on a broader foundation where perfect knowledge of the objective is just an extreme special case. And then I think to get the rest of the world to buy into this, this new approach, we need to start figuring out how to develop real applications that embody these principles. So to summarize, I think AI has enormous potential for good, enormous economic value, and that leads to, I would say, unstoppable momentum. And some people think that we can avoid risks simply by stopping AI. I think that's very unlikely. So for the time being, I would like to try to divert AI away from the standard model towards a form in which AI is provably beneficial to humans, even though we don't know what that means. Now, there are those who want to create a new field of AI ethics, and I don't want to discourage them from that. But I would say that the model in which ethicists are sort of wagging their fingers at AI researchers and saying bad, 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 is less effective than a model in which AI researchers get up in the morning and what they do as AI researchers is necessarily beneficial to human beings. And we're really talking about changing what counts as good AI, as high quality AI research or high quality AI systems development, so that it will be good for human beings. And there are lots of things that doctors and medical professionals and pharmaceutical companies could do that would be harmful. And we've seen some pharmaceutical companies do things that are harmful to human beings in recent years. But I think by and large, when a medical researcher gets up in the morning and says, okay, I'm going to do some really good medical research, it's going to be good for human beings if that research is successful. And that should be the case for AI, that it just what counts as good AI is AI that's beneficial to human beings. Now, there are other problems that I have not talked about today. One is misuse, and we just saw in the previous talk examples of misuse of AI to generate false information and to break our security systems and so on. I don't have a solution for that problem. And then overuse, meaning that if we do have AI that behaves itself and does everything for us, we have our own sort of social and cultural problem of how do we retain the intellectual vigor of human civilization when it's possible to simply leave the running of civilization to machines. And this is addressed in many works of fiction. Wall-E, this picture here being one of them, The Machine Stops, which I highly recommend, story by Ian Forster is another one. I hope we can begin a very important conversation about that problem as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Stuart Russell. Your presentation was very interesting, and we have learned a lot about the fact that it's not possible to define the quality of life, although most of us have tried to. So you really did shed a lot of light on the subject, and also about the fact that as regards our label, the positioning, the strategic reflection on the interaction between machine and man, and the understanding of human preferences in connection with quality of life. These are key elements. We hope we will still have an opportunity to discuss with you about this label, and I'm sure you will be able to contribute a lot to this. Thank you very much indeed. I will now give the floor to Dr. David Rudroff. Dr. David Rudroff, who's going to be talking to us about interaction between humans and machines, but more about the psychological aspects thereof. Je vais put your presentation on the screen straight away. I will be speaking English, but we have interpreters with us.
Thank you so much, David.
You are very welcome. Oh, so I don't have the presenter view. That would be better if we could put it into the presenter view, if it's not a problem. So let me just...
Not possible, unfortunately.
Oh, it was working before. No. All right. So...
Sorry. You can put your presentation.
What is it? Yeah, I think. Yeah, of course. All right.
Thank you.
I'm going to tell you a bit of a story about what I think is missing in current endeavor about human-like robotics, and how I'm trying very modestly to approach the problem by attempting to model subjectivity, or the subjective perspective, we could say, at the heart of consciousness to make robots more human. So the market for assistive robotics is hot and growing, and probably if breakthrough happens, the supply side will make it even bigger. That's the case in healthcare application, and now we have Elon Musk, who just proposed to build robots that would be designed to make human beings not necessary to do inhuman tasks, and leveraging on Tesla inference engine. And my bet is that it's not unlikely that it will succeed. So perhaps we want, as the previous talk sort of suggested, to expect that, sooner than later, the world is going to know deep societal change, maybe looking like some version, probably in a longer term than we think, of Isaac Asimov Foundation science fiction novels. And another segment of the market features a bunch of so-called robotic or virtual platforms marketed as empathetic. TA Swiss has been, working on a report on the topic for the Confederation. But the truth of the matter is that those so-called empathetic robots essentially leverage the human tendency for anthropomorphism. We attribute inner life to empty shells, and the result is often, if not generally, uncanny. Perhaps creepy sometimes. So, that's not the right button. Okay, that's not working, I'm sorry. I come back, that's not my slide. It switched between different strange modes, so that's the surprise with technology. And I'm sorry, because time is fleeting. Let's try again. Okay, so am I supposed to? No, because my tremors are messing, so I prefer to push the button. Okay, guys. So then, the question is, how can we make robots more human? Well, it's not a matter of outer appearance, of mimicry. It needs somewhat, the solution is obvious, but it's the most complicated one. It's that they need a mind like ours to govern their behavior. Of course, if they were be functioning internally as we do somehow, that would create human-like interactions, reciprocity, interpretability, true bonding, that's very important, trust and acceptance in the machine. Well, but if we push that idea forth, that requires actually to model human consciousness. That's not an easy task, of course. So where can we start? Should we try to build super intelligent machine as AlphaGo, supposedly super intelligent, with advanced language, with capable of solving complex tasks? Well, intelligence and consciousness are actually two different problems. They are related, but there are many conscious people that are not super smart all around. And consciousness is actually fallible and full of illusion. And that's a beautiful thing, like we share beautiful illusions, like the moon illusions, that we see much bigger when it's closer to the horizon. So somehow, sorry for the jargon, it's a sort of aesthetics, a fusion of form and emotion into meaning. And as a matter of fact, most current AI systems only mimic unconscious processing in the brain in a very crude and very basic way. I'm actually a neuroscientist initially, and the AI models are very, very far from the reality of the brain, even the so-called deep learning model. So my approach to it is actually to, start from the beginning. We need to make babies first. While they don't even speak or walk yet, and their intelligence is mostly potential, they are full of drives and hope for intersubjectivity and a satiable curiosity like the elephant's child of Kipling's story. So we should target that first. So one way to approach the problem, to set the stage and give you a sense of how I do things, sorry, some of it will be a bit technical, but I think intuitive, is to start from the general framework of active inference that my collaborator Carl Friston has developed. The concept is rather simple. It is, simply a way of saying, and actually formalizing mathematically, that, we embed beliefs and preferences, whatever they are, that we access them somehow to plan our actions, to make simulation about the future, the consequences of our actions, that we act and of course that we are confronted in a reality check, like sensory evidence, and that often so we are mistaken. There is prediction error. And that can be expressed as a free energy, which is a term that quantifies basically the divergence between your expectations and sensory evidence, your confrontation to sensory evidence. And that can lead to a feedback. And then the machines, the system, or us can have two choices. We can just update our beliefs, and sometimes it's hard, or we can just turn our back on the reality and avoid sensory evidence. So systems like that, they may do that, actually, just like us. So, and we believe that consciousness is actually something that participates and is at the center of active inference. So what has been said about consciousness across multiple theories that are all partial, it's like a global workspace that integrates multimodal information from all senses, monitor error of prediction and uncertainty. Systems that would be conscious, according to some, should integrate an internal world model, imagination capacities, attention capacities, planning and emotion as an evaluation of plan. We heard about reinforcement learning. It also has a situated character. It's viewpoint dependent, and probably that's why we tend to foster perspective-taking ability. We can take others' perspective, our own, from different places, up to modeling theory of mind, that is making inference about the mental states of others. But a more fundamental question that pertains to inner experience is, how can we understand and model the subjective perspective? What is the phenomenology of our experience? One aspect of it, which is very obvious and simple, is that we're experiencing within a three-dimensional subjective space in perspective. It's not just about vision, it's not computer vision, it's a much broader space in perspective, with all sensing informing it. And so how that subjective perspective could play a role in human cybernetics, that's one of the questions. One thing that we realized together as we discussed that is that consciousness, or some aspect of it, has a geometry. And it's non-trivial geometry. It's actually three-dimensional projective geometry. That's the geometry of perspective in 3D that you all know about in the 2D version of perspective painting. But here we are talking about a three-dimensional projective space. And with projective geometry comes a group of transformation. It's a mathematical concept that actually allows perspective change. And if you want to get an idea of what a three-dimensional projective space is, you can look at the work of Vincent Dubois, who materialized that sort of theory into marble sculpture. Here, these guns look like, okay, I see a gun from behind, it's in perspective. But if you turn it actually laterally, it's actually in perspective. So the theory is that consciousness actually builds representation like that, but usually we don't see it. We see them from the right point of view. From this basis, we can define a concept, start defining a concept that we can call the field of consciousness that will operate transformation of information in perspective. And actually, the group of transformation is a four-dimensional, operate in a four-dimensional space. So what does that mean? What did I just say? Wait a minute. A four-dimensional space, well, it's actually a perfectly computable space. And here you can see the sort of effect when you widely move this, the parameter across this four dimension that happen on a simple world model. You have a very somewhat psychedelic experience. The world is transformed, and it reflects properties that are deep in this geometry of involution. And it also has properties like dualities and reciprocities. So that if you look at something, if your perception is structured by this geometry, and you look at something or somebody, it will automatically and necessarily feel that it looks back at yourself. And that is sort of something we believe is important for understanding the basis of self-consciousness. So, but that is wild. Most of the time, the group acts in a much more constrained manner, so that we can act in the world and perceive objects in an adaptive manner. So when you bring all these principles together, as we do in my lab and with my collaborator, you can, for instance, understand a variety of perceptual illusion, and like the moon illusion, and simulate it very specifically make quantitative predictions that you can compare with virtual reality experiment to demonstrate the predictive power of the theory. But that's all fine, but beyond illusion, can we pull this Ariadne thread further to try to understand how we operate ourselves in terms of appraisal of value and drives? One of the things we know is that in psychophysics, it's somewhat described, the intensity of an emotion you will feel tends to be, it's not that simple, but to follow the law of an inverse distance to the stimulus. So basically, if the stimulus is farther, it's less emotional than it's closer. And actually, under some constraint of embodiment, this geometry entails that law. So from there, we can start thinking about very simple model of projective drive that we can embed into a free energy function on the affective side, for instance. So something bigger, because perhaps it is closer, should be more intense, more attractive or repulsive, depending on its intrinsic value, but also at an epistemic level, which is very essential. Actually, when you combine free energy and projective geometry, what you get is that the far and the unknown, infinity, is associated with more sensory uncertainty. And those machines, they want to reduce uncertainty, and they will be pulled and attracted toward infinity. They have actually an intrinsic curiosity, so affective and curious. And an interesting thing about it is that, well, it's okay, it doesn't need to work, is that when things come faster, closer to you, according to this process, that minimize the accumulated free energy than when they come slower, which is actually very consistent with the way we experience drive. We have impulses. Like kids, when they see something big, they want it to get close very fast. And that is actually something that this sort of theory leads to, systems that have drives, that are impulsive, that want things that get bigger, and that are very curious about the world. The theory also naturally generalized to the simulation of other minds. The systems, instead of using their own model of internal preference, will apply and infer, based on their behavior and emotion expression, models of preference that are in others, and use them to simulate the mind of others and predict them. You're going to say, well, okay, interesting, but this is all theory. But I'm going to show you very preliminary proof of concept, actually how that's translated into robotics. Very cheap robots, because I'm not wealthy in my lab to do that. And here it's an example. We consider a few of them. So let's consider agent 1. Agent 1 tends to like this cube here. And based on its observation, it hears sounds and many things of the other robot. It understands that the other robot likes the other cube. And actually imagine, literally project itself to predict that agent 2 is going to approach the other cube. And since it's a pro-social robot, progressively through social perspective taking, it will start changing its preferences and it's what attracts it. And progressively, it will turn around, get interested in what the other guy is interested, and as a result, enter in a state of joint attention behavior. So it's very important, the development of joint attention behavior, because, for instance, in autism spectrum disorder, this is something that does not develop very well, and systems have restricted interest. So let's consider another example here, the attribution of negative biases. So agent number 1 likes agent 2. So it's driven towards it, but it thinks that agent 2 doesn't like it. Actually, it's not the case. So in order to minimize its own free energy, because it takes into account the simulations that it makes of the other agent's mind, and anticipate that the other agent actually would have its free energy increased if it would get too close to the agent, as a result, it tends to use trajectories that are much more indirect. It is avoidant, a bit like as if it was socially anxious. And let's look at the last example. So this time, agent 1 and agent 2 both likes the cube at the bottom. And we hide those cubes so that they can only act upon their prior beliefs about the location of those cubes. But agent 1 doesn't like agent 2. So it knows, it predicts based on the algorithm that agent 2 is going to get to the place where the cube, the good cube, is supposed to be. But it doesn't want to get close. So the only way for it to kind of not increase its own free energy, actually decrease its free energy, is to move away, driven by its curiosity for the far. But now we substitute, we switch the cubes, and agent 2 cannot see that substitution, but agent 1 was a witness of it. So actually, as a result, it has updated its own beliefs about the location of the preferred cubes, but it knows that the other agent, will actually go mistakenly toward the wrong cube, which frees the way for it, and so it can now minimize its free energy, getting closer to the cube it prefers. So what that means is, it's taking advantage of what you understand of others' false belief, which is very important in child development. So when you ask clinical psychologists in training, using a test that we are developing, we are calling the Asimov test, inspired from clinical and developmental psychology, to rate the agents that they observe on these videos, what happened is that agents in which we enable this projective mechanism, they are rated as, looking as if as behaving more like human beings, and as looking more alive than agents that have much more limited mechanism of projection based on the combination of that geometry, that group of transformation and optimization process. So, if we continue going that way, the goal is, even though we are very far from it in practice, there are a lot of difficulties and challenges, is that we'll be able to create robots that share illusions with humans, that are governed by projective drives, a bit like us, that are curious, fundamentally curious, and that are capable of human-like empathy. I mean, they emphasize the like. It's not human empathy, but it is governed based on what we believe actually governs human empathy to some extent. So, as a result, interacting with them will feel more natural, interpretable, we will be able to understand them, and perhaps also to understand they can understand us, in particular through mistakes we make. Because part of your humanity, of what we share and how we connect, is by precisely understanding others' mistake, and we laugh about it. And there are wealth of applications, for instance, to help mitigate autism spectrum disorder by, fueling fun interactions, fostering joint attention behaviors, but also support the growing elderly population, often isolated, sometimes with mild cognitive impairment, by giving them also this sort of social and affective stimulation that we know is so important to stimulate cognition and resilience. And there are a lot of applications. So where can we go from this sort of crude proof of concept to market? So creating that ghost in the empty shell, I would claim, is as much a scientific and technological process as an introspective art. It's not alchemistry, but you really need to dive down deep into your mind if you want to model the human mind. And that's not an easy task. You cannot learn that in school. Of course, it requires a well-directed, reactive, interdisciplinary team, psychologists, engineers, mathematicians. And that I insist on that. We need great mathematicians. I'm lucky to collaborate with some of them, but they are essential. And of course, interfacing this kind of projective model and robot for the real world is not a trivial task. But we can leverage on some of the very amazing technologies that have been developed. And to conclude and finish, developing the principles and architectures is also important to extend them with language, intelligence, and spatial skills. It's further down the road, I have some idea, modest idea about how to do that, but that's another story. So that will be all for today, folks. Thank you much.
Merci beaucoup, David. C'était très intéressant. C'était curieux.
Thank you very much, David. It was very interesting, very curious also, because it seems so very unlikely to modelize these emotions or to have behavior-like emotions. So thank you very much for this presentation, explanatory presentation. So now I'm going now to ask the person of the round table to come to me. So now the Leonards Foundation, Mrs. Béatrice de Vergne, member of the Scientific Council, Mrs. Lila Delary, founder of the Empowerment Foundation, Monsieur Mr. Hervé Bourlard and Robert behind. Please, can you come to us, please? Thank you. You have any questions regarding all that you've heard today? Maybe do you have any questions? So maybe someone wants to ask a question. Would you like to ask a question? This is not the case, therefore, I will ask a question first. Can you hear me? So I'm going to have a first question for Mrs. De Vergne regarding all that we've heard today. You are a doctor, and we can see that with all the data we are collecting now about our connected objects, we all have connected objects with us, devices. So this will serve probably in the future, provided that these data are well stored and considered as medical data for predictive medicine. And I would like to have your opinion. What are the gains or benefits and risks of these major data collect? And data are being collected by private industries also. Can you hear me? Yes. What's very interesting, I think, that you are asking the question regarding the predictive medicine or the use of AI. AI is being used for customized medicine or precision medicine. There are several names, and which is made of several elements. We call it the 4 Ps: personalized, precision, predictive, and prevention. So where I'm 100% convinced, and I don't need to be convinced by some expectations, I'm being convinced by some achievements today of this medicine, is in the field of not the prediction, but use of data. That means there is really an impact of the collect of all this data and the use of AI to classify and categorize and identify very specific profiles of for every single pathology, for those quite accurate, for example, cancers, which really benefit from this approach. Also the pharmacogenetics, which allows to have better quantification of the medicines, and some orphan illnesses. Before, in the past, it took us about 20-30 years to know more, but then now within months we can identify some genes. So all these pathologies, why it works quite well, or it's a very useful tool. The reason why is that they give us quite easy answers or quite easy information. I mean, talking about predictive medicine now is that we want to say that thanks to all this data, we will be able to predict what's going to happen to you in 10 years. You will have diabetes or Alzheimer, or on the contrary, you're going to live until 150 years old because maybe we'll achieve this. Well, in the prediction, there is the use of data, which today we don't know how to combine. And what I really liked in the first presentation by Mr. Boulard is that there is no intelligence in artificial intelligence. So today, we cannot say that one day we'll be able to predict complex illnesses such as the ones we've talked about. We won't be able to predict if you're going to have a car accident or there's a major climate change or whatever. So the capacity of prediction is the most risky parts of what we confer to personalized medicine. This is the most risky part under a scientific point of view. And of course, this is also the most risky element under an economic point of view, because personally, there are some very unacceptable reactions, as we say, well, the people not vaccinated. I am vaccinated, just to make sure things clear. But when we say that the people who are not being vaccinated will not get access to the intensive care, this is ethically. This is how can we? Then we should tell the smokers that they won't be able to be treated either. So with an so to say predictive model, will give value to a very uncertain element, which is going to endanger quality of life. And we're talking about the quality of life. If we know that in 10 years' time, maybe you will have to draft your will. It's not a win-win situation in that case. So this is one issue. The other one is the economic problem towards insurance companies, which are going to say, well, now, and just to pinpoint that insurance companies, they've tried to do that when there was a change in the bill about the humans. They wanted to insert this provision saying that if all genetical data had been asked by a person, had to be given as an information to the insurance company. So what you want to tell us? No. It's very interesting what you're telling, but I mean there is no intelligence in predictive medicine. That's what you mean. There is no intelligence in artificial intelligence and not in predictive medicine. Today there is no intelligence in predictive medicine. Maybe I don't know what's going to happen in 20 years, but just another point. We're talking about quality of life and predictive medicine to improve quality of life. The first thing would be to ask people what they want. That is society discussions, which we started in conjunction with some projects, but the population at large, I mean, people, normal people, all ages, and say, finally, eventually, we don't want to know, but this is opening the discussion about what we can know, and we should replace prediction by prevention. Now we could make some prevention, and we invest very little money for prevention. So first money for prevention and then prediction. Thank you very much. I think this is a good message you're giving. So how could we reinforce or strengthen this prevention with the data we have now? So maybe to open the debate on society, to ask a question to the Empowerment Foundation, Mrs. Leila Delarive. An engineer friend of mine in Idiap told me that the ethical issue to know if what I do is good or not is not being addressed in schools, and the society is not addressing this subject. So where should it come from, the ethics? Should it be a specialized debate or not? First of all, I would like to say that we are living in a society where there are dividing everyone in a particular department. We have law people, engineers, doctors, and so on. And there is the reality of the digital world where all these partitions do not exist anymore any longer. We have access to the knowledge. We can follow courses online at the EPFL or in the American university. And what the tendency now is to have not a vertical society, but horizontal society. And we have not only one hat, but several hats. So when we have ethics departments like in different high schools, I think that basically what we lack is this pluridisciplinarity is lacking. And we should have an open debate, not only having engineers talking about IA. I'd like to know how many people here are not scientists. Who is not an engineer here in the hall? Oh, good, good. So we are working for this cause. So it shouldn't be a discussion only among specialized people. And this is the reason why I think it is really paramount to have a more humanistic approach of society. As Professor Bourlas said, we lost this humanist approach where we have historians, philosophers should participate in the debate and not have a vertical debate where we try to define several things. That's why I appreciated very much these discussions today, because we talked about society issues, and I'm fully against those theses where we should just refrain the public debate in the social medias. And even though there are some theses, we read some theses which are really against our democratic feelings, I think this gives us a picture of society, and we need to accept this and integrate it, not to fall into bias into the definition of these notions. And we should open the debate, and I really thank you for this action you've been doing for the last 50 years. Okay.
C'est un premier.
Indeed, I think this is a first step. Between our foundations, we can continue to do joint actions on social and societal issues. I would have liked to hear much more from you, because it would have been very exciting to hear more from you. Maybe I could give the floor to some of our board members of the Dalle Molle Foundation. Maybe each board member could give us his conclusions. I think we've covered a lot of ground, and yet there is still an awful lot of ground to cover. So it's a difficult task to draw conclusions. The idea is not necessarily to move forward on the basis of certainties, but we have to listen to all the arguments we've heard this afternoon to move forward in small steps towards quality of life. We are also engineers, myself in particular, and engineers in particular tend to want to devise solutions. The solution could come from AI. In the past, we've seen attempts with the GDPR in the EU to involve legal experts in the process, and this gave rise to some strange results. This means that today, every time we want to go onto a site, we have to click on our preferences, but that's not really the right solution. Of course, we have to control the quality and quantity of data. We've moved away from the data far west when there were no laws or rules or regulations. Now we've moved into a much more regulated area in which individuals are protected much more. So the actors are no longer doing any old thing. So we are regulating more, but maybe that's not the right solution either. The right solution is that we should be able to use the data, but we have to do so in a controlled manner. For medicine as well, medicine has to be able to apply cancer treatments to people who are capable of being healed, being cured, because statistics been shown that there are people who are more sensitive to those treatments. That would be something fundamentally useful. And when we have interests, when a piece of information becomes available somewhere in the world which is related to your interest, it would be great to get access to it. But this has to be done on the basis of collaboration. It's not the fault just of Google, but we have to reappropriate possession of our models. Of course, it's nice to be able to play with these models as an engineer. It's nice to be able to play with some models, but there are many ideas for patents and projects which are in the pipeline. Thank you. I would like to refocus our attention on values, because whatever the approach, we forget to hierarchize the approach. As an educationalist, this makes me think of our tendency to cut up the difficulty into cut up the objectives, and we no longer, after a while, we no longer know where we are. We no longer where we started from, or where we're going, or where we are. So as a pedagogue, I've often faced this problem. Then there's the third notion, which is that of globalization. I'm thinking of a French-speaking Swiss pedagogue who, when talking about this question of fractioning, he said pedagogues are people who surround a child with paper so as not to feel his or her skin. I think we have to feel people's skin. You have to get close to people. And we have to go back to simple human notions like communication, simplification, respect, and dialogue. But I have great difficulty in reconciling these two dimensions. Now, this description that I've just given may seem, one dimension may seem ridiculous, the one I've just described, but then there's the dimension of science and experiments and so on. At the end of the day, I have the impression that we no longer know exactly where we've started from, where we're heading, and where we find ourselves at the moment. You've mentioned interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinarity, but I think we have to better be able to feel people and to sense better what they want and to know what they need in order to succeed and to be happy. It's a word which I hardly dare use now. We have to introduce more humanism into our relations. These are not scientific notions or concepts. Of course, I've understood this, but for me, they are very fundamental notions. So science should come back to the service of these fundamental notions. I'm afraid that in the end, science may be working just for itself. That's the whole problem. In economics, in economy, we've seen that some companies are structuring so much and planning so much that they are really living only for themselves. They've forgotten that they have to exist in order to produce. The system is turning in a circle, going round in a circle. So my vision of life is that life is complicated, but maybe at the end of the day it's not as complicated as it may seem if we go back to fundamental notions. So I think the more complicated the notions we develop, the more complicated things will seem. Thank you for your very common sense-based approach, common sense which we saw at the beginning. I'm proud of being an engineer, and I'm a man of the right, and proud of it, but you can be an engineer and be on the right of the political spectrum, and at the same time believe in quality of life and humanism and other such qualities. But as an engineer, I have to be very pragmatic. So when talking about, I like to know whether we're talking about the present or the short-term future or the long-term future. When talking about the quality of life, I think that's a rather idealistic, utopian idea, because each person will come up with a different definition of quality of life, although of course it's a good thing to ask the question. The same applies to ethics. We know when someone is not ethical, but to say that someone really is ethical, it's not possible. It's the same as trying to define quality of life. When we ask the question about the existing systems, Professor Russell said something interesting in this regard. But in my presentation, at the bottom, what I was trying to say was that most developments in AI make us believe in things which don't exist for ordinary mortals, with one aim: to maximize the number of clicks, that's what Mr. Stewart said, and to maximize financial income and so on. And that is the fault of the present system, even though I'm on the right of the political spectrum. To go out and make people believe certain things at all costs in a bid to make profits, short-term profits on the backs of people who are suffering, patients, for example, in the field of medicine. This has to be expressed much more clearly in media. You've spoken about predictive medicine. I prefer to talk about computer-assisted prevention. Doctors do prevention. Insurance companies also do prevention. If you're a smoker, your life insurance will cost you more, or health insurance even. When you're aged 50, your additional complementary health insurance will cost you more if you've been a smoker prior to being 50 years old. What I think is shameful is that in conventional medicine, I can refer you to some articles which say that some engineers say that we should stop training radiologists because deep learning does the job better than humans, does the job better than radiologists. You need about 15 years of training to become a radiologist. It's clear that Google cannot just train people in a few months to become a radiologist. And these computer-assisted tools, computer-based tools, are just to assist radiologists, not to replace them. Now, even if you come along with a predictive or diagnostic system, before being able to use it, the system has to be approved and by certain administrations, such as the Food and Drug Administration. In the US, it normally takes about 10 years to get FDA approval in the US. There's only one which uses a little bit of AI to help radiologists. That's to detect breast cancer, and this has been the case since 2002. So in certain cases, there can be an equivalence between radiologists and AI. But 20 years later, only 3% of women accept a diagnosis by a computer rather than by a doctor, because they prefer to speak to a real doctor. So you have to look at the human criteria. All the machines we're looking at today are based on financial criteria, short-term profit. You have to be aware of that. And the objectives of the machines are optimized to make money. The criteria that are used to train the machines that Sébastien were talking about are to optimize things which make money as quickly as possible at the expense of the insurance companies and at the expense of people, of individuals. And this brings me back to the aims of our foundation. Our aim is to maximize the impact on the individual. So this is a person-related individual criterion related to the quality of life. That's rather utopian because it will not be possible to draw up an exhaustive list of criteria that define quality of life. But to come back to you, would you accept to be the object of AI-assisted prevention? Even when talking about prevention, of course, it would be interesting to know whether there are genetic factors which make us more prone to certain diseases, and at constant cost, it should be possible to do this. The machine I just referred to is only used by 3% of patients, but the machine costs 1,000 times more than a radiologist. We have to create a climate of confidence among the general population. It's something we've lost because of all these advertising-based tools and because of these falsified indicators, the aim being to make short-term profit. That's all there is. I'm a right-wing engineer. So what you say is we need more trust, more confidence. That really is the key. And at the moment, everything is being done to break this trust and confidence. I think there is one question from the floor. We will take this question from the floor. Thank you very much, Eve. Question from the floor. My question was, in fact, a comment, not a question, about all the things you've been presenting this afternoon. I think if we all want a better quality of life, apart from artificial intelligence, which would enable us to reduce or eliminate all these menial tasks, that would make things much easier. But when talking about prevention, what I think is capital today is that we have to open up this debate to the public. We need a revolution in that respect. And what we need is to have a proper understanding of our uses. What I've been able to see at all these symposiums and conferences and meetings that deal with this subject, one always comes back to the problem of use or usage. And if we don't ask these questions today, where are we going to be heading when it comes to interaction with between technologies and human aspect? Google knows exactly where they want to head, but I think that's the question we need to ask ourselves now if we want a better lifestyle. I have nothing further to add, says Aurélie. That really was the conclusion. Thank you, a big thank you to all our speakers for having participated today. And thank you for all the people who've helped us with the technology, the interpreters and other subcontractors who have enabled us to bring about this interface and who have made possible these presentations in English and French. Thank you, Marie, for having organized the event together with myself. I wish you a very nice evening. And the aperitif will be just outside, so we're just outside the Hotel Vatel, so we're going to celebrate our respective anniversaries. Thank you. Have a nice evening.